Life has a funny way of reconnecting you with people from your past, and sometimes those people bring unexpected twists along with them. I hadn't thought about Daniel in years. We had been close friends in college, inseparable even. But as time passed, we drifted apart, our lives diverging onto very different paths. I settled down, married my high school sweetheart Michael, and moved to a quiet town where we started a family. My life became filled with the routine comforts of marriage and parenting, while Daniel had taken a more adventurous route, traveling and pursuing a career as a writer. I often wondered about him, especially on late nights when memories of our youthful adventures would flood my mind. There was something magical about those days, the laughter, the boundless optimism, the dreams we shared. But I always dismissed those thoughts as mere nostalgia, happy to let the past stay in the past. That is, until one afternoon when a notification lit up my phone screen. It was a friend request from Daniel. A rush of excitement and curiosity washed over me as I accepted the request. Within seconds, a message popped up. "Hey, Emily, it's been way too long. How's life treating you?" The conversation flowed effortlessly as if no time had passed. We reminisced about college, laughing over the memories we both held dear. Daniel's wit and charm were as sharp as ever, and it felt good to reconnect. He told me about his travels, his writing successes, and his adventures abroad. I shared updates about my life, my family, my job as a graphic designer, and the cozy home Michael and I had built together. There was a comfortable rhythm to our exchange, a refreshing change from my usual day-to-day routine. After a few weeks of sporadic messaging, Daniel suggested we meet up. "I'm actually going to be in your city next weekend," he wrote. "How about we grab a coffee and catch up properly?" I hesitated, not sure how Michael would feel about it, but eventually I decided there was no harm in seeing an old friend. I mentioned it to Michael, framing it as a harmless reunion. He shrugged, giving me his blessing, albeit with a hint of curiosity. "Just don't let him charm you too much," he joked, clearly not expecting anything out of the ordinary. I laughed it off, assuring him it was just a friendly meetup. When Saturday arrived, I found myself feeling more nervous than I'd anticipated. I put on a nice blouse, fixed my hair, and tried to convince myself it was just an innocent coffee. But as I walked into the cafe, my heart skipped a beat. Daniel was already there, sitting by the window, his familiar, warm smile greeting me as I approached. He stood up, pulling me into a hug that lingered just a little too long, sending an unexpected thrill through me. "Emily, you look amazing," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Life's been good to you." "Thank you, Daniel," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "You don't look so bad yourself." We settled into our seats, and the conversation was as effortless as it had been online. But there was an intensity in his eyes, a magnetism that I couldn't ignore. We talked about everything, our careers, our travels, our dreams that had changed over the years. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine, and I felt something awaken in me that I hadn't felt in years. As the hours slipped by, Daniel became bolder in his questions, asking about my marriage, my happiness, and my sense of purpose. I found myself opening up, admitting to the little cracks in my seemingly perfect life. The moments of loneliness, the exhaustion from balancing work and family, the feeling that something was missing. His sympathy was intoxicating, and I found myself drawn in, eager to share more, to let him understand me in a way I hadn't let anyone in a long time. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, his voice soft and sincere. "Emily, have you ever thought about what could have been? About us?" I was taken aback, my heart pounding. The question hung in the air, both thrilling and terrifying. I wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a joke, but the intensity in his gaze told me he was serious. I felt myself drawn to him, a magnetic pull I couldn't quite resist. "Daniel," I began, unsure of what I wanted to say. "We were just friends. College was a different time." "Was it?" he asked, leaning even closer. "Or did we just pretend it was because we were afraid of what it could mean?" I didn't know how to respond. My mind raced, filled with memories, both of our past and of Michael, waiting for me back home. I knew I shouldn't entertain these thoughts, but I couldn't deny the exhilaration coursing through me. Eventually, I managed to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but the tension between us lingered, thick and undeniable. When it was time to say goodbye, Daniel pulled me into another lingering hug, his hand gently brushing against my lower back. I could feel his breath on my neck, and for a brief, reckless moment, I considered leaning in, but I pulled away, muttering a hasty goodbye before practically fleeing the cafe. As I walked back to my car, I felt a mix of exhilaration and guilt, unsure of how I felt about what had just transpired. Back home, I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself it was harmless. But Daniel stayed on my mind, invading my thoughts at the most unexpected moments. He started messaging me more frequently, and I found myself eagerly awaiting his texts, my heart racing every time I saw his name light up on my screen. One night, after Michael had gone to bed, I found myself deep in conversation with Daniel, discussing dreams and ambitions, regrets, and what-ifs. The conversation took on a more personal tone, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't even shared with Michael. It felt wrong, but it also felt good. There was a thrill in the secrecy, a feeling of being seen and understood. Before long, Daniel began hinting at wanting to see me again, and despite my better judgment, I agreed. We planned to meet at a restaurant downtown, far enough away from my neighborhood to avoid anyone we knew. The evening was electric. Daniel was as charming as ever, his gaze intense, his compliments sincere. The boundary between friendship and something more began to blur, and I found myself enjoying every second of it. After dinner, we decided to take a walk along the river, the cool night air adding to the atmosphere. As we strolled, Daniel took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. I felt a rush of warmth, a thrill I hadn't felt in years. We stopped by the water's edge, and he turned to face me, his hand gently cupping my cheek. "Emily," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've missed you, and I don't think I can let you go again." In that moment, every ounce of resolve melted away. I leaned in, and our lips met in a kiss that was both familiar and foreign, a mixture of the past and the present. The world around us faded, leaving only the warmth of his embrace and the thrill of the forbidden. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and secret messages. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to end it. Daniel was a breath of fresh air in a life that had begun to feel stale, and I was addicted to the excitement he brought into my world. But the guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed. Michael began noticing my distance, the late nights spent texting, the distracted look in my eyes. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, he looked at me with a pained expression. "Emily, is there something going on? You seem different lately." My heart sank, guilt flooding over me. I wanted to come clean, to confess everything and beg for his forgiveness, but the thought of losing Daniel, of giving up the connection we had rekindled, held me back. I assured Michael that everything was fine, blaming work stress and fatigue for my behavior. He accepted my answer, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. As my entanglement with Daniel continued, the secrecy began to take its toll. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that someone might see us together or that a slip-up would expose the truth. The thrill that had once fueled our affair was now replaced by anxiety, a constant fear of discovery. One evening, as Daniel and I sat together in his apartment, I voiced my concerns. "Daniel, I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this. It's too risky." He looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of frustration and longing. "Emily, I don't want to hide. I want us to be together, to have a real future." "But what about Michael, my family? I can't just throw everything away." Daniel's jaw tightened, and he looked away, a hint of bitterness in his eyes. "You've been saying that since we reconnected. Maybe you need to decide what you really want." His words stung, and for the first time I began to question my choices. I cared deeply for Daniel, but the reality of my situation was beginning to set in. As I drove home that evening, Daniel's words echoed in my mind. The weight of my decisions began to settle on my shoulders, and I found myself grappling with the reality of what I had become entangled in. I loved Michael, I knew that. But there was something about Daniel that filled a void in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was torn between the life I had built and the thrill of something new, something that had awakened a part of me I thought was long gone. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Michael and me became palpable. He grew more distant, spending late nights at work or in the garage, working on his projects. I could tell he sensed the shift between us. But I couldn't bring myself to end things with Daniel. Then, one fateful evening, Michael came home early, his expression unreadable as he entered the living room where I sat, lost in thought. He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from me, a strange calmness in his demeanor. "Emily," he began, his voice steady, "I've noticed the changes, the late nights, the constant texts. I don't want to accuse you of anything, but is there something you need to tell me?" My heart raced, guilt flooding over me. The words I had rehearsed so many times in my mind evaporated, leaving only a crushing silence. Before I could answer, he continued, his voice soft yet firm. "I spoke to Daniel. He told me everything." A cold wave of shock washed over me, my body going numb as his words sank in. Daniel? How could he? Why would he? I don't understand, I stammered, desperately trying to piece together what was happening. Michael's expression was pained, but his gaze was unwavering. "Daniel reached out to me a few weeks ago. He felt guilty, Emily. He didn't want to be the reason our marriage fell apart, so he confessed." I felt my heart shatter, torn between betrayal and guilt. Daniel had been the one urging me to make a choice, yet here he was, making the choice for me without a single warning. Michael took a deep breath, his face a mix of hurt and resolve. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, but I still love you, Emily, and I'm willing to work through this, if you are." Tears blurred my vision, my emotions a whirlwind of remorse and relief. In that moment, I realized how much I truly loved Michael, how foolish I had been to risk our life together for a fleeting connection from the past. "I'm so sorry, Michael," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was just lost." He nodded, reaching out to hold my hand. "I know, Emily. We'll get through this together. But I need you to be honest, and I need to know you're fully committed to us." I squeezed his hand, a surge of determination filling me. "I am, Michael. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes." In the days that followed, I cut all ties with Daniel, blocking him from every form of contact and focusing all my energy on rebuilding the trust I had broken. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with difficult conversations, tears, and painful silences. But slowly we began to heal, finding a new depth of honesty and vulnerability that brought us closer than ever before. Looking back, I realized that my entanglement with Daniel had been a wake-up call, a painful reminder of what truly mattered. I had almost lost everything, but in the end, it had given me a second chance to cherish the love I had taken for granted. As for Daniel, I heard through mutual friends that he had left the city, moving on to new adventures. And while a part of me felt the sting of betrayal, I was grateful he had forced me to confront my choices, even if it hadn't been in the way I'd expected. Life went on, but I carried the lessons of that turbulent time with me, a reminder of the power of love, forgiveness, and the strength it took to rebuild after you've lost your way. Months passed, and life settled back into a rhythm, but it was a different kind of peace, one forged through honesty and forgiveness. Michael and I leaned into our second chance, not just as husband and wife, but as two people who had faced the brink of losing each other and chose to stay. We began doing small things we had forgotten along the way: date nights, long walks, and moments of just being present with each other. Then, one evening, as Michael and I were relaxing in the backyard, he turned to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you ever wonder why Daniel did it?" he asked, his tone cautious. I paused, caught off guard by his question. It was one I'd tried not to dwell on, for fear that the answer might unsettle the peace we'd found. But looking into Michael's eyes, I saw the same curiosity reflected in his expression. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe he thought he was helping in his own twisted way. Or maybe he wanted to be honest, but it was just as much about him as it was about us." Michael nodded, seemingly lost in thought. "I guess it doesn't matter now. We're here together, and that's what counts." We shared a quiet smile, and as we sat there, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the second chance, but for the strength it had taken both of us to get here. A few days later, I received an unexpected message from an old mutual friend who had run into Daniel in a different city. She mentioned that he'd changed, quieter, a bit more withdrawn, as if carrying the weight of something unresolved. I thought about reaching out to tell him we were okay, that I had no hard feelings. But I decided against it. some chapters are best left closed. Michael and I continued building our lives together, with a renewed commitment to each other and an understanding that we would never take each other for granted again. The experience had changed us both, and in its wake, we had found a love that was deeper, more resilient. In the end, Daniel's presence in our lives had tested us, shaken us, and ultimately brought us to a place of strength. And as I held Michael's hand in the quiet moments, I knew that this love, tested and true, was worth every hard lesson learned.